Really thrilled to be here and to be here with you, Allison.
Phyl, this is going to be fun. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. As you all are learning, that you're in for a treat. Allison Manukan's played a key role in this book, and including the Manukan two-pager is named after her, which many of you have already been using. So we have a celebrity here with us. Okay. So I'm just going to give a little bit of an intro, sort of about the book and the and Never Search Alone, and the kind of the three big ideas, and then we're going to really focus in on one in particular that Allison helped to shape. That's so critical. So I want to say a number of women in product members and leaders have played a key role in shaping Never Search Alone and the volunteer community that we run over at phyl.org, Phyl.org. We have a volunteer community where we'll place you in a job search council for free and give you training and support. Whether you're in a job and thinking about what's next, or you're actually out of work and looking, we're building this global community. It's very exciting, and women in product has played a big role. In fact, a group of women and product members formed one of the very first job search councils when I was writing early drafts of the book. And they're also giving a conference talk. Check them out. And I also want to thank Annika John at Amazon for giving me and Never Search Alone a shout out in her conference session here at Women in Product. Okay, so just a quick overview. There's three big ideas in the book, Never Search Alone, right? Three big ideas. And they are essentially this. Number one, job search council or Never Search Alone. The key insight there is the following: everyone, no matter how qualified you are, no how qualified they are, whether they're a public company CEO with a great track record, a VP of product who's done some amazing stuff, a chief product officer, a director of product, an individual contributor, a college student looking for their first job, no matter who you are, when you're in the job search, you're feeling anxious and insecure and lacking confidence. This is one of the most important insights that powers the whole book. And it's kind of this secret that we're trying to like say, let's not have it be a secret anymore. Everybody feels this way. And it turns out that one of the only sustainable and repeatable ways to actually deal with that is to form a mutual support group, what we call a job search council. Because it turns out if you bring insecure and anxious job seekers together, just by simply sharing their insecurity, by being open and vulnerable and supporting each other, it flips that from insecurity to hope, motivation, accountability, and confidence. The most important thing in the job search, right? It's one of the greatest hacks in human psychology. And so that's the first big idea. The second is candidate market fit. Now, we all know product market fit, and that's critical to business success, of course. Candidate market fit, critical to career success. The key insight there is in the job search, you're the product. You're the product. Your skills and experience is the product that you're bringing to the marketplace. So you have to think about the intersection between both what you want and your strengths and how the market sees you, what the market wants. Candidate market fit. Okay. And Allison Manukan played a key role in shaping this concept, and we're going to talk to her about this in depth in a moment. The third big idea is what I call job mission with OKRs. Job mission with OKRs. What am I talking about there? It's very simple. We're saying when you're interviewing with a company, we want you to take charge. You're in charge. Don't be passive, be active. And in fact, don't rely on them even to understand the role. Most companies don't actually know the job they're hiring for or what the responsibilities are. So we want you to write your own job description. We call it a job mission with OKRs. We want you to do that early, start doing it early in the process to inform the interview questions that you ask. And then if it starts to get serious, you pull the hiring manager aside and say, hey, I've crafted something here. Am I understanding the role properly? Is this what we're talking about? That drives alignment. How many of you have ever had the experience of you thought it was job A and you took it and it turned out to be job B, right? We've all had that experience. So it helps you with the interviews. It helps you drive alignment around the role. And then it impresses the heck out of the hiring manager, improves the odds you get an offer. And then when you get an offer, it sets you up to negotiate for everything you need to succeed. What we call the four legs of the negotiation stool. Comp for sure, but also bang, 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 budget, resources, and support. Okay. You need to negotiate for all four things. And so these are the three big ideas in the book: Never Search Alone, Candidate Market Fit, and job mission with OKRs. Really drive the interview process yourself. All right. So with that introduction, I now want to uh, bring Allison into the conversation. We're so lucky. So Allison's a currently Harvard Business School professor, as you heard in the introduction. 13 years ago, though, she was at a crossroads in her career at Intuit. By the way, Allison Manukan is one of the first product managers in the world. She's a real trailblazer, a real pioneer. It's true. She's shaking her head. She doesn't let me say this, but it's true. Allison, you were at this crossroads, and in that context, you created the very first, what we now call Manukan two-pager. And everyone's
Can't believe
excited.
you named this.
Everyone who's read the book and has done the job search council and the methodology, they're so excited to meet you. You're the Allison Manukan of the Manukan two-pager. And you went on a listening tour to figure out your candidate market fit. But, initially you were kind of passive. Can you take us back to that important moment 13 years ago? What was going on?
Sure. Yeah. So I'd been at Intuit a long time and had a couple different roles. I'd been a general manager of the QuickBooks business. I'd wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. So I joined an internal startup essentially and was this more or less the COO of that division. But we just were in the process of closing on a acquisition where we were buying a new company. The two teams were going to be merged. The new CEO that we'd hired was going to become the new leader of the division. And it was one of those moments where it was really clear at a minimum my job would change, whether it would be there, go away. It was sort of all fuzzy. And honestly, I wasn't super focused yet on me or doing anything about it. I was kind of focused on the business. So that was the quick context of the moment.
Yeah.
Um,
Can
I
I
think
add
I,
something?
sure.
Really important to add, and I want so many of you watching this are in a job, right? And so this methodology is not just for those of you out of work and looking, but it's also for those of you who are in a job and thinking about your next steps in your current company. In fact, one of the key developers of this methodology, that's what she was doing. So say more, Allison. Okay. I
Yeah.
just wanted
So at that point, my job was still there, but a little unclear what the future was going to look like. Um, and I loved Intuit. I loved the company. I wasn't really looking to leave necessarily. But anyway, I happened to have had, I don't remember, a coffee, a lunch, something with a woman I'd worked for many years earlier and was still a friend. I never had the capital M mentor, but if there ever was one, she would probably have been it. Um, and I was telling her a little bit about what was going on, and she more or less was like, get off your tush. She said, what are
to.
you waiting for? Go start figuring out what you want to do next. Um, and that was kind of the shove I needed a bit to say, oh yeah, good point. It probably is going to change. And whether there's something there or not, I might as well explore what would be a good next. So that was sort of the triggering moment.
Now you
Um,
did something phenomenal. You're gonna hate me using this word phenomenal because you don't feel like that's but it really is because many people find it really hard to do what you did next, which was sit down and why don't you say what you started to think about.
yeah, so I started to draft a document and really sort of put myself in reflection mode, which is if I was going to think about what's next, tried to think about, well, what did I love? And when I got up in mornings and I loved my job that day, what was that about? And if there were days I hated, what was that about? And could I articulate for myself, sort of that description of me, more or less. Because then if I was going to go, be looking for something, I might as well. I mean, I think you've now coined it in a far better way than I ever did, but in this candidate market fit. But I think that instinct of it's only a win if it's a win win. So I might as well start figuring out what I want and value, not just what's out there. So that was sort of the beginning.
And so, I
Um,
mean, this is so exciting. I love this because this is the beginning of the Manukan two-pager. This was the first. This is the document we talk about in the book, and it's so fun because I get to tell you, I was like, thousands of people are creating Manukan two-pagers, and we have Slack channels where they're sharing their Manukan two-pagers with each other and getting feedback,
well,
before
you
they
give
go
me
out.
too much credit, but I hope it's helpful because it was really helpful for me. The exercise I went along.
A quick question though, so what I find is that many people like they really, really have a hard time slowing down, even for a moment, to be reflective and think about what they want, what they don't want, what they love, what were the good days, what were the bad days. Do you have any sense like why you were able to do that, or do you have any advice for people who maybe, feel that anxiety to just immediately go, start, trying to get a job?
Well, I do think, and I see this with a lot of my students now. I mean, I have the benefit now of working with a lot of MBA students, but people often ask themselves, what job do I want? And I don't love that as the first question, because I think you can ask a much more basic question, as you heard me say, like, days that I love, what's that about? Or days that I hate, what's that about? Because often, if you can get to the building block components, you can then get more creative about, well, ultimately, yes, I want to figure out maybe a job, but at this point, let's be more, I don't know, sort of building block reflective. And then I also wanted to check if part of that is like, also, what am I good at? And normally, I think for many of us, what we love and what we're good at are highly related. Um, but I also started sort of trying to describe, well, if I'm going to, I believe in leveraging strengths. So can I also describe what am I good at? So if someone wanted to hire to tap into those strengths, what should they be tapping into? And I think that's part of what prompted me to go out and start talking to people who knew me and saying, once I had a draft of like, am I describing this well? Like, would you agree if you were to, um, try to put me in a spot where you were really tapping what you think I'm best at? Is this what I'm best at? And that was super helpful.
I mean, I hope everyone in Women in Product, they're listening. Like, oh my God, this is product management, right? I'm thinking a little bit about initial sketching. That I'm going to go out and do some discovery work and iterate and a listening tour to figure out, what's going on. What do what do customers want? What are the pain points? How do I fit in that? And you just did that for yourself, and it's so so powerful. And I just want to reflect on this statement you made about the building blocks versus the title, because the big win there is that often when people do their listening tour, and we're going to have you describe this in a moment, if they focus on the building blocks, they discover roles and jobs they would never have thought of, that are amazing, right? So, and you did, and that's what happened to you in this case. But before we get to that exciting moment, can you tell us a little bit about the listening tour itself? So you went around and you spoke to, like, was it 30 people, Allison? How many people did you speak to?
Oh gosh, it was a long time ago now. So that's probably about right. Um, but more or less, since I was then in the mode, sort of kind of whoever I could. I talked to people who had worked for me. I talked to people I'd worked for. Um, and early on, it was really around, did I describe myself well? Am I missing anything? Sort of, is this an honest reflection? I mean, they can't tell me what makes me happy, but they can tell me what they think my strengths are. And I had started also building out the what it's not. And I think you have an interesting reflection that for some people it's easier to start there, of like, I know my idea of a day in hell is like sit in an office alone. This is funny given I'm a professor now, but sit in an office alone and think big thoughts, right? I am fundamentally collaborative to the core. I'm a Myers-Briggs E. I think better out loud. So I was like, do not put me in a job where it's like me and strategy solo. I'd be
Right.
miserable.
Right.
Um,
Well, two things about that, Allison. One is this was 13 years ago, and we all change. The market changes, so we all need to continuously think about how our candidate market fit evolves. But also, in your case, you're teaching at Harvard Business School, where it's a very collaborative effort, right? So you're not completely alone. That's one of the reasons I think you took that role, because that also that about yourself. Um, and I will say this notion, and it's in the book, and it many people, they're like, I don't know what I want, or I'm not, but they know what they don't want, and they know what they don't like, and it's so much easier. We call it the inversion exercise, to invert it and start there. And so that's in the book, folks. But just so, because I find this all the time with they're like, I don't know what I want, and a lot of career books are like, you should dream about but like, I don't know what I want, But if you start with what you don't want, that'll be easier, and then you'll get to the other things. All right. So
and it's
you did all
ultimately,
that,
by
and
the way, looking at options. I mean, hopefully you end up in a spot where you have options,
Right.
and I think most people do, but having that not what it isn't, what doesn't make you happy, and making sure you keep using that to
Yeah.
check, like, I'm not
Yes.
falling into this because just
Yes.
someone wanted me, even though it kind of
Yeah.
described the role that wasn't what
And
gave
by
me
the way,
energy.
Allison, this is something again you would be so happy. I hope you hear, a little ringing in your ear every time. But the Job Search Council, one of the major roles of the Job Search Council later in the process when people are interviewing is to keep them true to their Manukan two-pager. Like, wait a minute, that's not what's on your Manukan two-pager. Or wait a minute, that's you said you don't want that. What are you doing? Oh, right, right. It's so hard. It's so easy to just take the wrong thing, right? Especially if you need a role. It's like all of your anxiety will be addressed if you can just get some job, right? But that can really lead to problems, and I'm sure that's resonating with a lot of people here. Okay, all right, so keep going. More on the listening tour.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think so as I started to have a better clarified description of sort of what I loved, what I was good at, and what the next thing wasn't going to be, I was more able to ask, well, for people who didn't know me well, I could just share that, but then said, if this is true, if you were sitting in my shoes, do you have any advice for me of what would you do, or what would you be looking at, or are there roles you know of that leverage these kinds of strengths? And so then I could get into much more sort of advice driven conversations, which were also really helpful. Um,
To say, and you can do this in so many instances, not just in the job search, but to say, how would you approach this if you were in my shoes? And the conversation is so much more creative and open than if you say directly, just what do you think I should do? No, what if you're in my shoes? It puts them on, you're now on the same side of the table together, right? And I find it opens things up and it makes it easier for them. Yeah.
yeah, and I think having given people a description, I mean, I think I heard you talking about people um, putting themselves in an uncomfortably small box. uh, but I think they also can be more helpful, creative if you have now given them, here's really what I'm all about. Now, what would you do if you were standing in my shoes? They're able to bring everything they have with, thinking about what they just learned about you. Um, and for me, what was interesting, I mean, I was super lucky that started developing almost a list of options around the company of different potentials. But I remember I then went and had a drink with one of our former CEOs, and he's like, you need to start articulating this more in terms of now, what are your criteria? Like, if you have options, you have options. How are you going to pick what matters to you, not just what you're good at, but what would make it the bullseye of right for you? And that was also a really helpful development of sort of, now that I was clear on the strengths, could I get maybe pickier and more pointed, and maybe to your I think you encourage people to often get narrow
Yeah.
and
Later
that
in the
was,
process. Not yet. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. By the way, I hope everyone just sees why I'm so enamored with Allison Manukan. She's amazing. What live at the conference? Please tweet and talk about and clap for the wonderful Allison Manukan. Just such a great friend and it's taught me and so many people so much. Um, question for you, Allison. Oh, thank you. It's it's really no, I'm just really touched by all that you give and how much I've learned from you over the years. Um, when you were doing this and you were starting to get to this criteria, right? Um, now, s- just to set the stage, at this time, you're living in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley, right? And um, you start to in your listening tour something starts to come up that you had never thought of before. Tell us about that.
I don't know which one you're thinking of, but maybe the role I ultimately took, perhaps. Um, uh, Well, two things. Interestingly, I'd actually written on this document Bay Area based as one of my criteria as I'd been developing criteria. I was willing to travel, but Bay Area based. And I'd first started hearing about some opportunities. Intuit was just early in their journey of going international, uh, about an opportunity internationally. And then I started learning about an opportunity leading a business that was into its Boston office. Um, and maybe a funny small sidebar. But the international opportunity had really opened my eyes to the idea of a stint. And that I think sometimes it's so paralyzing to choose jobs because we often think they're forever. And maybe, I mean, I was one of those people who, opposite of job hopping, ultimately I was at Intuit 18 years. So I didn't have to worry about having moved around too often. Um, but this international opportunity opened my eyes to, would I be open to that for a while? Would I learn something? Would something good come out of it? And so my husband and I had a bunch of conversations. And we ultimately concluded we'd be willing to go do sort of the expat thing for a bit, because that's all really that was expected of you. But so when this Boston thing came up, there was nothing about me that was at that point open to moving to Boston, other than I'd started thinking, oh, I don't have to actually make decisions that this is forever, but more, is it a good fit for now? Does it meet my criteria now? Um, so I don't know if that if you're expecting that story, but I think it's an important notion of just, can you, for some of us, part of choosing is scary because it feels forever. And it doesn't have to be.
So sadly, we're coming to the end. We have a couple minutes, and so
Yeah.
you ended up taking that job,
Yeah.
which
I took a
quickly,
job at
yeah,
leading the space
it
business.
ended up being spun out. You were the CEO, and then you moved on to Harvard Business School. You're now on these Fortune 500 boards, which is amazing. But this listening tour and figuring out your candidate market fit, like doing this and doing it well, can really change the trajectory of a career. And Allison is a living, breathing example of that. In our final moments, I just want to say a couple of things. One, the book came out last September. We've got 260 job search councils running. We could have thousands more. We have a volunteer team of people here ready to help. So if you have friends or colleagues either looking internally or externally or whatever it is, please come over and join us. Sign up. We're happy to have you. We're building a global, volunteer-led movement to help everyone take what we're learning today from Allison and the many others out and helping people build better careers that they love and really changing their trajectory. I also want to say that my mom played a key role. She actually started the very first council in 1960, for elementary school teachers in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles. And I just want to show you, this is a photo of her. I dedicated the book to her. Can you see that? That's her at Van Nuys High in the 1950s in the San Fernando Valley. Her nickname was Chick. So I want to really thank Chick. She was the first woman in product all the way back then. And Allison, I just want to, as we conclude, there's more to say about, like, people hesitate because they're anxious, they don't want to take the time to do this, or they're afraid to hear the feedback. And maybe you can leave us with one last thought about listening to feedback and the fear of that.
I think at the end of the day, folks enjoy being helpful and giving advice. So be willing to ask for it. I think deeply there are positive endorphins going two ways when that happens. So you've been a great evangelist of this, but ask for help. People will enjoy helping.
Yes. And if you want to know the 3 words that summarize the whole book, it's ask for help, ask for help, ask for help. All right. Well, thank you so much, Allison. Thank you to the women in product community, which helped to build this book and this movement. So happy to be here. And thanks again to the wonderful, wonderful Allison Manukan.